All right, so I'm the second to last person to talk. The other one, Rong's gonna chat with, talk about the papers. I'm excited to hear about that. This is preliminary work. I mean, we've been at it for a little while, but I'll tell you why it's kind of tricky to work on this topic. So, genetic endowments, Alzheimer's disease, and economic outcomes. This is joint with Young Me, whom you've already met, Megan here, who unfortunately had to skip, and KT. So, a couple of uh, comments on nomenclature for those who are uninitiated. Feel free to jump in if I say something wrong. So, one often refers to as ADRD, or Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, which are defined by the Department of Health and Human Services as debilitating conditions that impair memory, functioning, primarily in older adults. The most common one that everyone's obviously heard about is Alzheimer's disease. A likely culprit of Alzheimer's are these plaques that you've probably heard about. It's when these naturally occurring proteins, beta amyloids, they clump together and block brain cell function, and they shrink the brain. It kind of goes back to John's talk. I mean, it's grisly if you look at these pictures. It affects approximately 6 million Americans now, and over ages 65, and that's expected to be about 20 million in the next 30 years. And direct medical expenditures, there's all sorts of different numbers, but let's look at that one. $200 million in the year 2010, and then there's all these indirect costs. And one can imagine all sorts of different ones, but one that comes up a lot is caregivers of people who have, say, a spouse or parent, $1,000 a year on average, where you're averaging over people who have a family member with Alzheimer's. So it's like real costly. Okay. Empirical work on ADRD is sort of a mess for a lot of reasons. I think that one is that there's selection into diagnosis, right? And we'll actually show you a little bit about this, but it's sort of not clear who gets diagnosed and who doesn't, and why that is. It gets even trickier because diagnosis is in part with clinical tests. Lately, you can do it with brain scans, but a lot of it is sort of post-mortem, actually, that you go in and find these plaques, and then you can say, okay, this person had Alzheimer's, or probably had Alzheimer's, because we still haven't made the direct perfect link between Alzheimer's and these plaques. It's just like the likely culprit. But I mean, a question just to kind of I think there are lots of questions you can ask about this type of selection. But I mean, one thing that's never been asked is, to my knowledge, is with people who have never exhibited dementia or cognitive decline, do we see these plaques? And I think there's literally one data set where they have a somewhat representative sample where they did postmortem brain tissue analyses. It's called the Baltimore Longitudinal Aging Study. So we're going to actually be able to, I guess, answer that question at some point. But if that's the case, why would that? Why do some people with plaques do okay and some don't, or why are some diagnosed and some aren't? And just that's just an example. Just more generally, are there environmental factors that would help us to explain why some people get diagnosed and some people don't, when they might have the same risk of getting Alzheimer's? The language we use is the idea that there might be protective or insulating factors. So protective means you don't get sick, or you don't actually exhibit decline. And I guess insulating would be you do exhibit decline, but there's something around that's keeping that from translating into worse economic outcomes.
I thought there was a study of nuns. It was very, definitive on it, right?
On which part?
On the notion that he had these nuns who actually were, when dead and dissected, they had Alzheimer's, that they were living in these social communities.
Yeah.
Here, it's Russia.
Yeah. So there are, so there can be.
That was known, so the socialization was involved.
Yeah. Socialization, education. Yeah.
The sample is religious, not just not like that.
Yeah, I think I'm going after yes, there probably are.
The religiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mean, that's part of the point. I mean, I think the point about Loach is making is that if you're focusing your attention on this like kind of group of people who've fallen off a cliff, then it's just like the same thing on the outcome, right? I mean, what about the people who didn't fall off the cliff? We'll never know what it is that made them not fall off the cliff. But that's the kind of, I think the point we're trying to make is in a broader study, can we find systematically factors beyond the nun study that would tell us something about protective insulating environmental policy modifiable characteristics in the ADRD literature. That's, I think there's like this kind of catch-all sort of like theory of cognitive reserve, that there's just things that you might do that make it so that you don't get sick, or you don't get as sick. And I think the way they sometimes think about it is that, if you're educated, then, there might be like additional neural pathways built, and then, one shuts down because of plaques, and you have these other ones that are like backups. But I mean, that's all, a lot of that is not substantiated, it's just an idea. So I think that, yeah, please.
Yeah, the study that Jim referenced,
Yeah.
HRS had helped all done, sort of, use of MoCA that different assessments can be used for Alzheimer's, so that they may not have to find, diagnoses that the religious community has, because that's everybody. They had any, sort of, but we're moving in the direction of trying to get more of this data that people. We're giving comparable data, so we're getting out of this. I mean, there's some evidence to suggest that we're moving out of this, right?
Yeah, okay, for sure. I mean, and a lot of it is because a lot of it is because social scientists came to the party and said, I'm giving you kind of an overview, not like previous to today, but like why social sciences showed up, and then look, your sampling on the outcome, for example, was something that has been well known. So absolutely. But okay, so there's a couple of potential narratives here, and the results are gonna show you are gonna be not as optimistic that I hope, but one is that there's these like high risk people who are undiagnosed because they're just not doing so poorly, and there's like higher environmental reasons to point to that are either protective or insulating, and then we can use that to develop policy, to help people from ever getting sick in the first place, or for doing better. Or maybe there's a kind of less optimistic story, which is like, oh, we're just underdiagnosed. There are people who don't get diagnosed, but they should have been. Okay. And well, I think that the second one is probably, according to what we've done, more of what's going on. So if we want to compare, if we don't want to be looking at just people who got sicker, and we want to actually compare individuals with similar risk, I think this suggests one reason for examining genes in a representative population, right? Because then you have people with similar genetic risk, and you can follow them along and see what happened to them, and relate that to their environments. There's a few other reasons why genetic research can be useful. So AD is very heritable. You look at twin studies at 68%, and then there's different structures to the genetic risk. There's like a couple of markers that have like huge effects on your risk of developing disease, and then there's kind of like a polygenic score. And moreover, and I think this is just kind of a side point. I mean, there is an argument, and there's actually debate about using information about genetic risk clinically, not to necessarily inform treatment, but I think the initial wave of when social scientists were came to the party with doctors saying, well, there's no ethically good reason to tell people they're at genetic risk for AD because we don't have a good treatment for it. Maybe there are some treatments that are slightly better now, we don't know. But I think the economic argument was like, yeah, but people, even absent a treatment, you can have people parent in all sorts of different ways for this eventual outcome, or this eventuality. Okay, so given that setup, what are we going to do? So first, we're going to just relate genetic measures for ADRD to things like ADRD diagnosis, but also to like cognitive decline. And I think, the reason I want to do this is I kind of want to first say, all right, do people with similar risk, but one person's diagnosed and one person's not, is it because the one who's not diagnosed just didn't suffer any cognitive decline? Because that would be the kind of, there's something protective, there's something that's keeping everyone ill. Then the second piece is to say, like, well, does this then translate into economic outcomes? So people similar in risk, we could look at, you can stratify the sample and look at people who were diagnosed or who weren't. You can even look at whether they exhibited cognitive decline or not, and then say, like, okay, do these genes still seem to affect or be related to economic outcomes, income, working, that sort of thing. Also, things like whether or not they're aware that they might have future care needs or that their mortality might be higher. Are they engaging in planning activities, right? This would be like an insulating action, right? Just actually directly ask. Are they doing things like having a witness will, talking about their future medical care? And then, of course, we're going to fall into the trap of doing G by E interactions. And here, I'm a little unsure about how I want to think about this, and I was thinking that after I think 2 days of talking to G by E, I also want to like pull back on this part of the paper a little bit, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. Yeah. Okay, and so what do we find? So ADRD genes predict cognitive decline, whether or not if you just look at the undiagnosed, you're still predicting decline. So there is some kind of selection into diagnosis. It's not clear what's driving it, and we're certainly not. We cannot make the argument that people who are not diagnosed are doing just fine. That doesn't seem to be the case. And we also find that conditional on diagnosis, even conditional on cognitive decline, you still find these additional effects on Endowments. And so they're doing worse. Okay, so this is translated into outcomes that are worse. There's no really discernible relationship between genes for ADRD and beliefs about illness and mortality. Probably one of the most disturbing findings is they're actually not engaged in more, they're actually engaging in significantly fewer planning activities. So just the sorts of people that you would want to be planning are not planning. And so there's that. Now, in terms of the G by E, I think, the knee-jerk, maybe wrong approach, and I want to not do that anymore, is to, and I mean, we did a lot of different professions, so it's more just like listening to all of you and these debates we've had and discussions the last couple of days have got us thinking that it's not that I necessarily need there to be an interaction between, yeah. Yeah. You can do different age groups. Yeah. So then I'll show you the sample. You can tell us what we did wrong. So the idea here is not necessarily, oh, I need something, I need some environmental factor that's kind of like only or mostly going to help people with high genetic risk of ADHD. Actually, that's not what we care about for policy, I think. I think what we care about is anything that reduces cognitive decline or slows cognitive decline would be great. What we're maybe not looking for the purposes of ADRD is something that only slows or reduces cognitive decline for people who are not at risk for ADRD, because then that's only helping the healthy people. So maybe you don't want that. So I think that we should go back and do some more regressions, but I'll show you actually one example where indeed it's retirement actually. It seems like the people at low risk of ADRD are the ones who benefit from staying working, whereas the ones at high risk they don't. So we'll get to that in a second. But a quick word on, and this goes back to Joe's question. What are we doing here that's different from other people? I mean, there's the kind of like looking at the people who are sick kind of analysis, and then that's been augmented and I think developed to do this kind of case control type of study, right? So you look at people, so like there's a whole bunch of economists who've done this kind of thing. And I think it's very useful to say, okay, let's look at people who have exhibited cognitive decline, match it with somebody else in the data set, and then let's see, how early did we start to see things going wrong? There's a couple of papers saying that, 20 years prior to your diagnosis, we already see wealth differences. And we see that you're, in your 40s, you're already like making mistakes about paying bills and things like that. So there's a couple of tables there. But of course, you're still focusing on the people who are eventually. Okay, so there's that issue. And then, or you can kind of do the thing where you say, all right, well, let's use panel data and look at some kind of risk variable, and then kind of see how people develop different things. And of course, then you just deal with the regular thing that we always deal with. It is kind of analysis, which is everything's endogenous, and so that's for arguments. Okay, but we're definitely fitting into the second. Right? We're looking at everybody and looking at different risks. A quick word on education, by the way, is, education, like I said, predicts lower ADRD risk and less cognitive decline. And there is this kind of like mixed story here, which is that, they're less likely to be but as soon they're quicker to, let's see. Right. So they're less likely to be diagnosed and to exhibit cognitive decline, but if you're more educated, you're going to be diagnosed more quickly. So this is more like this access story.
It's like in discontinuity. It's like,
yeah,
it's probably what you said initially, could you just stay for the whole thing? Where these people didn't know high level of they weren't taking care of themselves.
right.
So the crucial thing here is just that somehow it's reached a clinical threshold.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
It's not decline though, in the sense that,
just
level.
Well, yeah, what you generally see is that regular people are exhibiting some kind of a decline that's kind of considered natural and not a problem. And then there's this kind of like level effect. And then it, so I can show you in a couple of graphs how it looks.
Yeah, no, just the two different points. Instead of moving back and forth.
That's true. I am. There's nothing to it. I mean, there's like the level, yeah. There are two different points, yes, level and decline. Usually this is going to be big. I mean, I can just go straight into it. We're contributing to a bunch of literature on the topic, who have started to look at things like, how early on does this show up? And again, it's because there is this kind of natural level of decline, and then there's kind of either a quicker decline or just a level difference. Something like dementia or some kind of decline earlier.
Is that biological or is it social? So I have to be a billionaire or president of the United States or something, and I'm heavily protected even though I have substantial cognitive.
But I think that's what we're trying to think about here. Are there things that we can look at and say, oh, this person seems to be doing fine economically, but if you ask them recall questions, they do poorly. That's possible. Or are we saying that this person just actually answers a question better despite having the same genetic risk? I mean, that's what
I just wondering exactly what the behavior is that's defining the critic.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay, well, we can get to the measures. That's
Because somebody who's kind of something, take Howard Hughes, I guess he had real problems in the end, but he took care of himself.
Right.
He was worried about this Alzheimer's or whatever.
No, I agree. I mean, this is why I think we should make a distinction between
No, I'm just wondering.
protective. Oh, the matter, yeah. So
is there some biological distinction?
So part of the problem is that there isn't. Like, this is, I think, part of the problem is that you have, like, you gotta let me get to the score so I can just tell you, then we can talk about why it's all wrong. But yes, I mean, I think this is, measuring it is part of what makes it hard for me to understand how to get around it. Okay, the basic point I'm gonna make here about genes is that there are two SNPs that like drastically increase. If you have like a certain allele that drastically increase the likelihood of getting developing Alzheimer's, and then there's this like polygenic score. And this is a sort of a picture of these plaques that slow down these or that sort of destroy the brain by destroying the kind of these neurological pathways. And then there's a polygenic score. That's like lots of little effects. All right. We're gonna use a health and retirement study.
Wait,
Yeah.
polygenic scores are formed on people who are diagnosed in their brains.
No, not necessarily. No. You can use like brain scans, or they just have to go through clinical
What's the
diagnosis.
brain?
So like late, so I don't know if anybody in that HRS that would have been brain scans. That's a little bit later, but there's like a clinical definition. I mean, there's like, you're forgetting things, they interview your family and so on, but they don't like verify it necessarily until after people are dead, and then they find. That's right. Okay, so let me just jump right into this part, which is the measuring. That's there that you would never find out until the end.
What are you saying with a good telephone period?
So one measure of your number diagnosed with a memory related disease, and again, there are many. Alzheimer's is the one that's the most common, and then there's like different ones that. The main score that's used in this data set and often in other places is a 27-point cognition scale. So memory recall and worse, delayed recalls, some subtractive number, and then there are these cutoffs. So normal, so if you score between 12 and 27, you're normal. Impaired would be 7-11, and they define dementia as 0 to 6. So those are the definitions. Now we're not going to necessarily follow these definitions. We'll use a continuous measure, and actually we'll dummy it out. So
Sorry to do this, but to tell us a little bit of how are they? I mean, I don't remember now how they calibrate this, but surely not a lot of those are based on brain scans.
no.
Compare the cutoff. So this is.
Like, you mean like how did they come up with this?
Yeah, I think it's self-report, right? Self-reported diagnosis, subsequent, right? But you get this back to the selection.
Like self-report.
No, when they color, this is like when they.
All of them get tests. All of them do these tests. Everybody in HRS does these tests. And then there's self-reported health outcomes, right? One of which is getting diagnosed with
The number there.
that selection issue of
Huge. Also, isn't there gonna be some stigma when we go on reporting?
Well, they also asked their.
they do this, they do worry about that.
Okay. So with all these caveats, right? Hey, by the way, I mean, these are caveats that I'm like, I hope it's clear that I'm embracing them. Like I like understand that this is all the problem, and I think that's really why we want to be here. Thinking about it. Let's see. So the mean is about 16, and then you have these percentages, other the dependent range or the impaired range. And then we also have, 26% of the sample has one copy of the allele, and then 1% has the 2 copies, which leads like a 12-fold increase in the chances of. And then we have, so that's the fuller sample, and then some slightly younger sample if we want to look at labor market outcomes. We have a few other kind of variables that we just are going to look at, but this is not an exhaustive list. But you work for pay would be an economic outcome. A planning outcome would be if you have a witness will, and then we are looking at one that we looked at for a while was, do you have a union job? The idea being that you even if you fall off a cliff, you still have a place to go because they're not going to fire you. It was just a thought. So here's the LW score distribution. And here is if we look at it with relation to the AD score. So just kind of pre-watch you, yes, the AD score is going to predict this thing. Okay, so you have a higher one, you're going to get a lower.
Is ApoE in the AD score?
In the AD score, no. So we removed ApoE from the AD score, and then so what's considered best practice is use the AD score without ApoE, which are these two, which is the one where it has this huge effect, and then you have dummy variables for 1 or 2 copies, and then you put all that in the regression. Ditto on, this is just in looking here. Impaired is kind of like the middle, like the not worst ones. It's the probability of that, if, again, about the eighties. Okay. So this is the average, LW score, in the HRS from age 50 on. So this is, I guess, what I was fumbling to try to say to Jim, like you have this kind of level difference if you look at high versus low PGI folks. That just kind of continues around. So there's this level difference, and that just means that the low PGI people are gonna get to problematic numbers on average a little bit earlier. With ApoE, it's kind of interesting. They're kind of doing the same until age 65, and then you see that these folks on average are going to start to have much lower, or somewhat more lower. So you see it's kind of separation. So it's a little bit of a different pattern empirically of how the different genes relate to the AD score versus the ApoE copies relate to this one. All right, so we look at cognitive decline and memory-related disease diagnosis. This is the full sample. We did this regression 25,000 different ways, so I'll just show you one. I mean, I think what I wanted to show you here is that, okay, you have this AD score, plus these, different numbers of copies of ApoE. Obviously, this is worse, doesn't happen very often, so maybe a little precise. But the idea is that, okay, yes, a higher AD score associated with a lower score on the cognitive test. And this holds whether or not that you were eventually diagnosed either with a memory related disease or with Alzheimer. And so the idea again is, okay, even among, and you can just actually split the sample up and say, okay, you still unrelated with the enthusiasm. You're basically saying, even on people who are diagnosed, you're still finding this negative relationship, so why aren't they being diagnosed? Well, it's not because they're not showing some kind of decline. They are declining as per that, but you might be worried about. Huh? Oh, you can wait.
It could be that the AD score declines among is associated with declining cognitive function just among those who are diagnosed. Like that.
Yeah. But I'm telling you that we split it up and we did it, and this is. Oh, okay. Well, no, it's not over here.
Also depth, Steve.
Yeah, here's where I said, and we also just split it up and okay. Okay, I think I just set this part. Okay, so then we're gonna say like, all right, what about for other outcomes? Okay, so we know that they're declining, but is this translating to worse outcomes? And the answer is, yes. So they're, you control for, you can look at people who are not diagnosed, you can control for that. And you're still going to get, for example, if the AD score is associated with a lower probability of working for pay. Okay, so it's not associated or not really clearly associated with nutrition, maybe a little bit with nutrition, but not or mortality. Certainly not with beliefs. So it's not like they're like expecting that they're going to have problems necessarily. I guess one exception is you have ApoE. They seem to be aware that they might be moving into it in the next few years. So okay, maybe there's some evidence that they're thinking for some folks. But I do wonder how much of this is just people who probably had somebody in their family. But I don't know. I think this is a little inconclusive because of the flipping of the signs. What is pretty not sign flippy in the sense that we see a lot of it is there's a lot of different several different variables you can look at related to what you think of as planning activities. And we generally find that again, diagnosed, undiagnosed, people with higher AD scores are less likely to engage in activities that you might think of as obviously insulating, given that there might be this eventuality. So full long-term care insurance talks to family about their future medical care as a witness will. All that goes in that direction, which I think is, again, one of our more striking and disturbing results that, exactly the people who might want to be planning are not the ones who are planning. Okay. Okay, so until now, when I said, genetic risk predicts worse outcomes, economic outcomes, less financial planning, they might compound one another. these relationships hold when we adjust for cognitive decline and also diagnosis. So the last thing I want to just mention is to say, like, okay, you know, if I only have a minute, I'll just kind of go quickly through it. So you might think, okay, well, are there again like environmental factors that seem to be especially helpful for people who a high risk of developing Alzheimer's, so AD score or APOE? And the answer is generally we don't find a whole lot. But that doesn't mean that we haven't, just because we don't find like kind of a G by E interaction doesn't mean that we don't find something that's protected. Like we do know that education slows or leads to delayed reductions in cognition. And so just because that helps anybody, even people who are not going to develop Alzheimer's with a higher probability, doesn't mean that that's not policy relevant, right? We don't need the interaction for being policy relevant. So the only thing that we really would not find terribly helpful are things that only help people who have a low risk for Alzheimer's disease. And so the last thing I want to do
Is there an effective education above and beyond? You showed us a graph where higher cognitive skills lead to a slower decline.
yeah,
So is there an additional effective education above and beyond?
yes.
What's the thing?
I would have to go back.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, but it's
Clearly is an independent effect.
yes, and or the EEA score. You can look at both. They both have an effect. And so the last thing I want to show is that, you know, and this is a little bit of, you know, say bad news. We look at retirement, that it seems that these folks are retiring at the same rate, but just very quickly, we basically said, you know, after you retire, there's pretty good evidence that retiring, you see, is associated with kind of a faster, more rapid decline in your cognition. Okay, so that would suggest that maybe staying working is protective. And so we interacted that with ADRD risk, and we actually find that, you know, that only seems to hold for people this protectiveness for this insulation that happens with still working seems to be concentrated on the people with low ADRD risk. This is not the people that you want to be helping. This is, I mean, you want to help everybody, but this is basically saying this is only going to really help the folks who aren't at risk. Okay, which is actually a bit of a story about, you know, how cognitive reserve might work. What this is saying is that in this specific case, cognitive reserve is built, which I think we, you know, repackage a little bit as making investments in human capital that will generate, you know, delayed decline in cognition. This has been not work out so well for people with high risk of ADHD who are kind of on this trajectory versus people with low risk who can then make this investment and slow.
You want to make that as cost saving.
Oh, I mean, to the degree that we,
Well,
yeah,
I think about that.
I don't think we can. I think we can work on it. I mean, I think right now we're. I think right now we're looking at patterns, and you know, if there's something interesting to focus on, we can work on it. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me to discuss your paper. So the first thing when I accepted the discussion of this paper is that I
Only goes one way.
The small one at the top.
I don't want to show my last slide for sure. Okay, so I'll just use the old fashioned way. So the first thing when I get prepared for discussing this paper is to learn a little bit more. So it, to my surprise, is much more wide and I would say common because based on Alzheimer's Association's website, when three seniors die with Alzheimer's, all the other dementia. So and among all those causes, Alzheimer's is most common because of dementia, accounting for 60 to 80% of the dementia cases. And as Nick already mentioned, about 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. And also, based on the website, 11 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other. My research for Alzheimer's disease, I also go to YouTube and I look at people's comments on the Alzheimer 101. You can see that people have comments about when they care for their family members, it's very difficult, a lot of suffering. And in terms of economic cost, the cost is estimated to be about 1 billion, and is projected to be about $1 trillion in 2050. So it's a very big, important economic, and also manage aging process. So as one of the part is that Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging and is caused by which engram which damage brain cells. So what I've learned is that there's no single cause of Alzheimer's disease. It's likely to develop from multiple factors such as genetic, lifestyles, and environment. Understanding of Alzheimer's so far will help inform my discussion. So the first biggest risk factor is age. Now that is family history, particularly if someone has a family member who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and is very strong predictor for the future, for the potential development of Alzheimer's. And after that, it's just that there's no clear order. This is just the way I'm listing it. And also genetics. So among which APOE genes, if a person carries a copy of it, which APOE gene is 4, it's a strong predictor for Alzheimer's disease. If the person carries 4 copies of APOE4, it's even stronger. Okay, and after that, lifestyle or risky behaviors. We've discussed that social active is very important part of it. And also eating healthy diet, avoid tobacco or any kind of bad kind of into your brain, and exercise both body parts. All of those will, as you can see, help as we go down my discussion. I will echo to my understanding of Alzheimer's disease in this session. Now let me provide my general comments on this paper. So I really like this paper, and I think that helped me to learn a lot about Alzheimer's disease and how to think about the economic outcomes of Alzheimer's disease. So the research question for this paper is to check to people with different genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease make different economic choices during old age. In particular, the sample they are using is from HRS, which include people who are about 50 years and older in the US population. So what are the key findings? So the key finding is that individuals with high risk genes are less financially prepared. Of course, we have gone through a lot of different outcomes, such as whether you have acquired a long-term care insurance, you have a you have set up a bill, and you pay for work. All of this, all the Endowment rates a very extensive but careful analysis. And my comments is not about the validity of analysis, but my comments is really about how how should we think about the results which have been discovered or documented in their study. So here are my thoughts. So this paper helped me think about anonymity preparedness. So now the big question, which is documented in this paper, is why individuals with high genetic risk are less economically prepared. So I come up with very intuitive 3 non-mutually exclusive reasons, and they have very different policy motivations. So now the first reason is lack of information. So we may say that, okay, so people may not know that they carry risky genes for Alzheimer's, and they do not understand Alzheimer's disease. Imply that you have this gene, you are more the generic risk. If you have this gene, you are more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. We can see that in Nick's analysis, he also showed that people's belief about their mortality risk is not correlated with those with the with the risk of disease. So then if that's the case, policies that promote Alzheimer's disease awareness may be very. However, I think that I would think that some people may already know because of your family history, and also if you search Alzheimer's testing, you would see that there are the search pop out a lot of different the testing people. Some people at least know and about this Alzheimer's disease the genes testing. So that's part perhaps because the second part of the story could be a lack of resources. So what do I mean by that? It means that what if those people they have low savings, right? So in particular, if you look at the document in this paper, is that the high genetic risk is associated with low education, is documented in the paper, and also low capacity to work, which Nick showed, and also low income during old ages. So I have suspected that those people also have no savings. So if I have no savings, there's nothing for me to prepare. I'm not going to buy long-term insurance. I'm not going to prepare have a will because I have nothing there. There's no need. So now I go back to also Jim's comments is that if we think about this is the reason can we perhaps the policy focus is going back to early and middle stage of life. Think about is there something we can do about self-insurance? Okay, but however, we know that self-insurance is good if the risk is small. When we have Alzheimer's, it's really a huge risk. Perhaps in the end, we have to people may have to rely on public insurance, which is Medicaid. So there are people with dual eligibility qualified both for Medicaid and Medicare. And for Medicaid, we know that it's income and asset tested. It covers long-term care for people. It covers long-term care for people, and also covers all portion of nursing home costs for the eligible people. So then this address this part one is thinking about early stage, and another is thinking about Medicaid. Now, last part, potential reason is that people not lacking of resources and not lacking of information should not lack. Perhaps they rely on their own self-insurance, or perhaps that again, they have to rely back on the public insurance. So those are the specific comments I have regarding the current result of the paper. Now I have some other comments that relate to prevention of Alzheimer's disease. This, as I've said, is informed with the fact that based on my understanding of Alzheimer's disease, is complicated interaction involving lifestyle choices. And after choice, genes, family, and age do not change, but risky behavior, lifestyle choices can be modified. Here, I'm picking up a specific choice, which is smoking. But the reason I'm picking up smoking is because I think smoking is most important. Risky behavior Alzheimer's just because this is a risky behavior that I have studied and I'm familiar with. So you see that if I look at over the time period that I've cleaned up for my own research project, 60% of men aged 18 to 85 are current smokers. And smoking would reduce life expectancy by about 7 years, controlling for education. So what that implies is that once you have a behavior that reduces your life expectancy, so that will affect any kind of investment behavior, such as human capital investment, such as savings. Because if I'm going to live less, why do I even have less incentive to invest? So, and then use this privilege of discussion. I'll bring back my own paper and try to draw some insight. My own paper is with Further Hickman, and trying to draw some insight from that. So, from our paper, what we see is that we are looking at the relationship between education and smoking, and we see that education reduces smoking, and without smoking, education can be increased. So, what that means? It means that in our paper, we are looking at things like first is that the decision of investment and lifestyle choice is a joint process. It's a simultaneous decision. If I'm planning to have a life that is long and prosper, I'm going to not only invest in my human capital, but also reducing my bad behaviors. And there's a spectrum of choices, of course. That's the first side. Now, the second is that when we are making decisions, we are doing step by step. Every step, each step accumulatively become a bigger step. So as you become more addicted and get into that behavior, so that's not done for your later stage of life. Now, if I apply what we have learned about young people for old age planning problem, what I think, what I have in mind is that the choices between lifestyle choices and financial preparedness, they are interlinked together. So potentially what that means is that policies that promote healthier lifestyle choices not only can delay Alzheimer's disease onset itself, but also because those choices makes this life plan of these choices increase these policies increase life expectancy and also the potential abilities to incur current possible future that can induce seniors potentially to make better prepared financial choices. Now let me conclude my discussion also for our conference. I'm very privileged to be here. Let me conclude with this Ms. Sparks. From those who have started he was born with a Vulcan father and a human mother. Vulcan society very proud that they put that logic and the control of emotional controls. And Sparks, human heritage has been considered to be different in the Vulcan society. However, it has proved to be a very valuable member both to the Vulcans and also to the humans. I want to use this word to conclude my discussion. I hope we continue to live long and prosper.
It's also a reason you really need to control for the first like 20 principal components to from Vulcan, ancestry. Very, very important. Okay, we'll open this up to questions or comments.
Yeah, just had a quick question that, well, first, like, really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. And then just curious about like that, so that decision about the PGI for Alzheimer's to break out the ApoE. And so is this like, and Hugh agreed with that, it looked like, so is that like an ad hoc decision unique to this PGI, or is it is there a rule that if a single SNP explains more than X% of the phenotype, then you have to break it out?
I don't know.
It probably
If
depends on the phenotype you study. For some well-studied phenotypes, the literature on how ApoE influences those is rich. Whether additional loci, which you put into the polygenic risk score, is less clear. So that's why you want to single out ApoE and see if this additional score coming from weaker effect everywhere still contribute to the phenotype.
Sure. And is there any other PGI where that's done with some single?
Because you can rarely find diseases where you have such a big effect like ApoE. Maybe I can find 2-3 examples, and that would be age-related macular degeneration, usually very late onset diseases where selection is not a big problem. ApoE is probably one of the biggest you can ever find.
So know if smoking is not so dramatic. There's one SNP that it really matters. Does that ever split out?
What's the effect size?
It's about like
It's about 1 cigarette a week or something. That's Mr. Big in the GWAS world. Yeah.
Yeah. For ApoE, talking about outreach of 3, I think. And then so if you have a sample size of 60,000, the p-value is 10 to the -300.
Well, I think that's similar for Mr. Big or p-value. Yeah, you're right. Relative to other smoking.
Yeah, the p-value is below 300, but the sample size is 1.3 million or something like that in the latest G-scan.
So for Alzheimer, you get 300 when you have 80,000 samples.
With that 80,000, yeah, so it's smaller. But yeah, I haven't seen people doing that with Mr. Big.
Yeah, I don't know. Apparently the backstory is Laura Piper, one of the big names in this. Apparently they discovered it when like Sex and the City was a really big show. So they decided to call it Mr. Big. I don't know. Maybe it's stuck.
Okay, so it is actually.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
It's a question about Alzheimer's more than about genetics, so maybe you don't want to answer. But we've had a recent episode, we've talked about social isolation and so forth. I'm wondering how much the recent episode has really been informative on this importance of isolation, not necessarily for this, but for cognitive decline in general. Or when you put people in solitary confinement, we really know how much the IQ and social factors decline. So we have some experimental evidence outside of just the genetic, get a sense of how deteriorating it must be. If you're at 40 years, this guy was recently released. He said, listen, I guess 40 years of penitentiary and solitary confinement. That's only a good measure to know social interaction for a while. Just wonder how badly people decline. Is that known by anybody?
No.
Interesting alliance.
Yeah, I think
We can wait a little bit because you got different cultures, right? It brings
People go through, yeah,
So
right.
you can look at the decline earlier.
so. I mean, I don't think that there's experimental evidence. I know. I mean, I'm also new to this, but I do know that's a very research because it's nice. But I mean, there's different things that happen. People. This is what my Alzheimer's colleagues, know a lot more about it. There's people who worked from home, so there were more people at home.
Yeah.
But then there were also families who didn't see their families for.
But what about people who work in lighthouses, say, or, crossing guards? I'm just wondering, people who are social isolates, there must be some body of knowledge, right? This can't be a good thing to work in a lighthouse 24 hours a day. So I agree. That's it's too rare for that.
People who are other groups, like maybe like a tribe somewhere, but they might also. There's no AD risk variation, so you don't know necessarily what's
Right.
what's probably.
I just wondered.
But I don't know.
I know we've run out of time and run out of steam and gas at
Lots
once.
of ideas. Lighthouse people.
Well, yeah, maybe we end on that. We'll come back, we'll write a grant to randomize people in the lighthouse.
Are you saying we're all in cognitive decline right now?
I think,
There is natural cognitive decline.
Education house. Education house.
Education helps are great. But I think for people on that.
all right, I think let's adjourn and step out of the. Everyone for coming and.
I have a little bit of time.
You know, just,